My name is, in fact, Kat King, and I have the privilege of working on Twilio's developer education team, where we build out our docs platform and write content and run training events to teach people how to use our product. Before we dive in, I want to make sure my clicker works. One second, there we go. A little background on Twilio, if you're not familiar with it. We're a cloud communications company. Basically, we build APIs for developers to add communications like SMS, voice, a whole host of other things to their applications. Twilio is a developer-focused company with a pretty good history of developer documentation. In fact, it's the first API I ever touched when I was first learning how to code 5 years ago, and it made me feel like I had superpowers because I could send a text message with code. We have a history as a company of caring about documentation, and we've had a team of folks who help build and maintain the docs for a while now. Everyone on my team is a developer who also likes writing and cares a lot about education and documentation. So we're in this fortunate position that we can ask some hard questions and start challenging how our docs work. So today, the next half hour, I'm going to share with you the story of our journey over the past year towards what I'm calling empathy-driven documentation. You don't need to be an expert in APIs or even developer-facing documentation to follow along, but I do promise to share a few of the concrete things we learned over this last year about what our docs need to serve our developers well. But what I most hope to show you this morning, to give away my thesis, is this. We will build better developer documentation only by building our empathy for developers. So let's start by talking about that word empathy. Brené Brown describes empathy as the skill or ability to tap into our own experiences in order to connect with an experience someone is relating to us. So empathy is asking us to connect with an emotion that someone else has. And this can be a really tough task. This is asking us to climb down kind of into the dark well and sit with someone who's having a hard time. It's more than like, hey, you're stuck down there, here's a sandwich, but it's like actually engaging with them there. So how do we, as people who tend to not see or know the people our work affects, build this empathy? We're writing code or documentation or support articles behind a laptop screen somewhere for someone to read behind their laptop screen somewhere else. We don't really have a lot of visibility there. So how do we add compassion to what's typically a pretty isolated career? Well, one way we can start getting a glimpse into our developers' experience is a double-edged sword known as Twitter. And we do watch Twitter on my team a fair amount. And sometimes we see really fun things like this, people saying we've done well. Someone got interested in web development because of Twilio. That feels awesome. Some people are just too kind and give us beautiful compliments. We're like, thank you, I know, we're amazing. But then we see comments like this, of someone pointing out that our docs have duplicates in a bunch of different yet official places, and some are outdated or incomplete. And the thing we have to admit about this person is they're not wrong. That's absolutely a true thing about our docs. It's a problem we have. So while Twitter might not be the best mechanism for understanding how well your docs are performing, and I'll argue it's not, it's really easy to be like, Twitter, people like complaining, or to be obsessive about it, about every single comment that comes through. But it's actually a pretty amazing tool, because we get to start hearing what's actually going on in real time with our developers and our documentation. So for us, tweets like this act as a canary in a coal mine, just a little signal that everything might not be joy and easily deployed apps for people on our platform. So we started asking ourselves more seriously, are our docs actually good? And what does that mean? What does it mean to have good documentation? And we realized we didn't even fully know who the people are on our platform. Who are our users? Are they hackers? Are they product managers? Are they CEOs? Are they junior devs? And what do they do on the docs? What do they need that they are or aren't getting? So we embarked on a journey to try to discover some answers, ultimately looking for the answer for this one big, scary question: do our docs serve our audience? Are we actually helping developers on our platform succeed and feel empowered to build amazing things with our products? So how can we know if the docs we're producing are actually any good? Well, on my team, we were used to watching Google Analytics vectors. You might be familiar with, if you're content creators especially, things like bounce rate, traffic, time on page, registrations. And as people who owned the documentation, these gave us pretty much the only real glimpse into how our docs perform. But in May, about a year ago, I guess 1 year ago exactly, our team got together in a room to try to hash out what our success metrics should be, with this idea of like, what is good documentation? And we had to acknowledge that the key things we'd been looking at, like traffic and signups, didn't give us the full picture. They couldn't actually show us how delighted or frustrated a developer was. Imagine you have a developer who's new to a team, and the code base they're working on uses Twilio. They have to go to our docs. They have to use our product. Imagine someone's CTO tells them, go figure out if we should use Twilio on our platform. That person's gonna sign up, and they're gonna explore the docs. So those high-level metrics aren't really showing us if we're serving them well. So the question then becomes, how do we measure something as ethereal as quality? Right? It feels fuzzy. I'm someone who's very data-driven, and it feels really hand-wavy to talk about measuring quality. And it's challenging, but it's not impossible. So much like starting a first draft of anything, you kind of just have to start somewhere. You could send out surveys to your users. You could post anonymous polls on the internet. You could find a feedback mechanism you can throw on your docs themselves, and that's exactly what we did. By July last year, we launched a lightweight pop-up widget across our docs to ask one pivotal question: did this content serve your needs? Did this page serve your needs, yes or no? And we hoped this would give us a sense for how we're doing. What's weak, what's working well, how are we looking in general? And ultimately, our goal was to determine if this was a metric we could use going forward to measure our work. So we left this up for a couple months across all our docs pages, and it started giving us some solid quantitative data to work with, helping us understand, in general, how we're sitting. This data analysis was a lot of Google spreadsheets and making up metrics names like %happy. We were figuring it out as we're going along. But one of the things that we got to do with this data was start digging in. Are different content types working for people? Are there any products that we're not doing as good of a job in? And we're actually able to get that data, and you can see here, like our voice docs, while they're not where we wanted them to be, are doing okay. And over on the bottom right, our error code documentation, abysmal. Like people were just having a real bad time. So then we could go in and start fixing it, start figuring out what we needed. But this one little tool also opened a new avenue for qualitative understanding. We finally had a way to talk to the people who are having a less than ideal time on our docs. So if anyone answered no to this question, did this page serve your needs, we would prompt them, say, hey, could we call you? Could we just have a 15-minute chat about what's going badly for you on the docs? And a surprising number of people said, yeah, sure. And were more than eager to tell us what was frustrating for them. So the conversations I had with developers that summer showed us, honestly, we had a lot more to dig into. A lot of kind of random pain points. We were starting to see some patterns, but still didn't have a really clear, deep sense of who our users were and how they use the docs. We were just starting to get some glimpses. And in this time, I'm on these calls with our developers, people who are feeling stuck or frustrated, or we said something would be easy and it wasn't. And this starts to build my empathy for our developers, which honestly kind of hurts because our brains are wired to run from pain. And if you've built something and poured your heart into it and someone's like, that thing is crummy, you're like, no, you're crummy. No, but honestly, a lot of calls ended and that's how I felt. It was like this gut reaction of like, you don't know how hard we work. So I'm gonna bring Brené Brown back up. If you're not familiar with her work, I highly recommend go watch her TED Talks, go read her writing, she's brilliant. But back to talking about empathy, she says, empathy doesn't require that we have the exact same experiences as the person sharing their story with us. So I'm talking to these developers, and I don't have the exact same experience. I'm writing the docs. I'm learning our products so we can document them, but they're the ones who have to fix the bug in production, who are getting frustrated because they don't understand the complex content we have. But Brené says, empathy is connecting with the emotion that someone is experiencing, not the event or circumstance. And here's where I realized, oh, I've totally felt those emotions before because I've been on a dev team with a bug in production and I have to fix it fast and I don't understand the documentation. Or I've been in a class in high school where the teacher said, this is easy, and talked for an hour and I was lost and confused and felt really stupid and kind of angry about it. So that's what I have to connect with. And I know there's deeper we have to go to fully understand the experiences of our developers. So it's time we climb down into the proverbial well with our users, not just survey them, not just get a list of things they like and don't like, not just get a set of feature requests from them, but really understand what they're going through when they approach our docs. And so for this, we turn to in-depth user research. And I'm not going to go into details around the hows and whys of user research because you should be at the next session where Jen is going to talk about it in depth. I'm really excited about that talk. But I will tell you a little bit about what we found. So our first batch of user testing happened in September, and for this study, we had a user researcher meet one-on-one with 9 different developers. We picked a whole wide range of people from the different personas that are at our docs, the CTO, the hacker. And we chatted with our users about their needs and experiences for a little bit, and then we just watched them work. They either worked on a task they already had going, or we gave them a sample task to accomplish. And if you haven't had the chance to watch someone like actually work with your products or work through your docs, I highly recommend it, but it's going to be tough because the things that made so much sense to you when you were building it maybe don't make sense to other people. So anyway, we had some goals for this. The first goal we had in this round of sessions was, who are our users? Trying to answer that question of, does a product manager want to see something different than a junior developer? Do we need to write or produce our documents differently for different types of people? And the short version is, all of our users, no matter what their persona is, pretty much want to see accurate code more than anything else. The way they actually approach the docs, pretty similar across the product managers and the CEOs. And the other question we had was, do our content type distinctions make sense? And this might be a weirdly specific thing to be asking, but we had built out our information architecture on our docs around this idea that developers are drawn to distinct content types. Someone wants API references, someone wants a tutorial, people want guided walkthroughs. And we wanted to know, was this actually helping people making these distinctions? And having these content types as a foundation of our information architecture, was that working? Were we too broad? Should we get more specific? Should we combine our content types? So that's what we're trying to figure out. So this is the top of our homepage, and we watched people work, and we saw some things. Our biggest mistake was in thinking that developers were like primarily and solely driven by this difference in content types, that these would be the best entry points. Up at the top, that's pretty much only nav we had, quick start guides, tutorials, API references, but we kept seeing people asking, but how do I send a text message? How do I send a phone call? How do I get a phone number? How do I do the Twilio things? And we saw by watching just 9 different developers do their work on our docs how task-oriented people were when they came to our docs. And while this information architecture probably worked when we had 2 products, SMS and voice, it's 10 years later now, and we have more than 20 distinct products. So this answer to our content organization question was effectively a shrug from developers, kind of like, I don't care, just help me accomplish my task. And we realized we were asking the wrong question. It's not, what do you want us to call this thing, a guide or a tutorial, or does this organization make sense to you, but what do you need to succeed in the docs? And we started to realize we had a few bigger problems than we thought. With over 1,800 unique URLs, 1,500 pieces of sample code, 20+ products, new products and features every day, we have a problem of scale. Some code wasn't up to date with its latest API versions, people were feeling lost and confused, people couldn't find the piece of documentation they needed to succeed. Our playbook needed updating, and we were finally able to see this really clearly. So we spun up some more goals for user research, did some digging into academic research, and our team committed to a docs quality metric. So we went from that little widget, yes, no, to building a custom ratings widget for our docs in October. That looks like that. This is a user-reported quality rating, and it's become our main metric. Users can rate any page any number of times. If they rate less than 4 stars, we open up a pop-up and say, can you tell us more about what's not working for you? So we can kind of track this over all of our content. And that data gets aggregated into our CMS, where contributors have visibility into what's working and isn't on a given page. And over the next few months, we also build out a dashboard to track how we're doing overall, filtering by products, filtering by different things, trying to make it easier for our team and other docs contributors in the company and stakeholders to understand how the docs are doing. And in addition to aggregating feedback, we built a Slack integration to pipe in any docs ratings that were less than 4 into our team Slack channel. Did I mention we're a team of developers and like we probably get too excited about building stuff? It's true. But what's cool about this is we got some valuable feedback with action steps. There's a lack of example. Okay, we can go address that immediately. We also get some fun feedback that's a little more confusing, like very bad service, put it to your house. So there's different levels of quality of the feedback we get from people. And to be honest, at first, I thought all this tooling and this Slack bot would just be a lot of noise, that we'd either be too reactionary or we'd just start ignoring it. But what's cool is, ultimately, this has helped build a lot of empathy on our team for our developers. It's raised actual bugs, and it's helped us to see trends across our different content. We see a lot of, I can't find what I'm looking for, or there aren't enough examples on this page. But the flip side of this is it's the internet, and people are frustrated and somewhat anonymous. And so we see some comments like this one. I'm just gonna let you guys read these because it hurts to read out loud. Okay. And this comment. These are real things. They don't censor their own comments. That's for your benefit and mine. This is one of my favorites. So, as you can imagine, at this point in our journey, it's really easy to feel pretty destroyed. It's wintertime and I live in New York. It's like, put on REM's Everybody Hurts on repeat every morning, or your sad rainy day song of choice. And here, that's a little melodramatic, but it's kind of close to home. Like, here's where it's easy to lose hope, where I kind of dreaded opening my laptops in the mornings, where the work of empathy really starts getting tough, where I wanted to respond to those people by shouting back at them, but you don't know how hard it is to maintain so much sample code. Or, you're on a glossary page, it's not supposed to have examples. Or, still have some feelings there. Or my favorite, why don't you just read the doc? It's there, you just didn't read it. But this was me requesting the empathy of my users, that reaction. Understand how hard it is for me. It's not me seeking to build empathy with them. Someone's lashing out at us because we made them feel stuck, or we said, this is easy, and it wasn't, or we didn't give them the tools we promised we would to help them succeed. Someone complains that they can't find any useful documentation because they need that documentation to do their job, to fix the bug, to get funding for their startup, to keep their nonprofit running. And this is where we need to remember, ultimately, it's not about us. We're building the docs, we're writing support content. None of this is about us. And that's easy to forget, and it's very human to forget. But what we have to remember is we need to learn what hurts our developers and what helps our developers, what confuses or frustrates our users, and what can lead them to success. The work of empathy here is on our shoulders. So when we can remember that, get that perspective back in line, we can do things like reach out to people who are having trouble with an email and say, hey, we noticed X gave you trouble. We're so sorry, that sucks. Can we help get you unstuck? Or, thanks for letting us know, we fixed that bug. What else can we do to make the docs better for you? And here's where we find, from time to time, the little sun peeks out from behind the clouds because someone turns around and says, oh, I didn't know a real person would read those comments. And then they show us what's tough, what's broken or confusing, and they help us get better at our jobs so they can be better at their jobs. And we start learning what developers actually need, what good docs mean to people on our platform. Okay, so we have all this information, bits of direct feedback, user studies, academic articles we're reading. We're starting to learn some big lessons. What do we do with it? This is where we buckle down and just start building. We embrace iterative development, which you may have been on a product or engineering team or worked with one that works this way. Basically, the idea is make small, iterative changes and constantly evaluate if they're working for you, rather than just building like one insane thing over the course of a long time. So as we're realizing a lot about what's broken, both at a micro and macro level, we just start doing the work. So this process, high level, investigate, this is what we've been talking about up till now, digging into that user feedback. We'll get a sense that maybe some content isn't working, so we'll run a user study on it, or we'll do some UX testing. And we're trying to formulate a working hypothesis for what the right solution is to an imperfect developer experience. So next we test and measure. We like to test the changes and measure their outcome before sinking a ton of time into development, especially when we have an unproven hypothesis. So should we use colorful syntax highlighting for our code samples? Let's just run a quick UI test on some mockups and see how it works. What's the right information architecture? Let's spin up some UX around content organization. Does a tutorial really need a big red sign up now button? Let's A/B test it to find out. We live in the marketing section of our organization, so signups are top of mind for a lot of our peers. And there's a running hypothesis that a big red call to action that says sign up now will make people sign up more. Fair? So we thought, let's just test this theory. So we ran this, we built this little sign up for Twilio button on one of our quick starts in one of the languages we supply to half of the traffic that came to that page, including this button. And we run this test until we have plenty of data to show us something concrete, and that was that the hypothesis was false. And that happens a lot with A/B testing. You've got an idea, and it's like, no, that's not actually what people need. And here we learned that there was no evidence that the presence of a big red button like that would make people sign up more, which is great, because it means that we didn't spend our dev time from our team fully implementing something across all of our content that developers actually didn't want on their content. Because not only did this not increase registrations, but people found it kind of annoying. So we saved our developers from a crummy experience too. And once we've done our testing, if we've proven our hypothesis, we just start building. There are some cases where we can't really A/B test like a simple change, and we just have to bite down and build something better. So here, it's really important that we know how we measure success, and we commit to watching that metric. So we have quick starts, get up and running with Twilio, and we realized they probably weren't working well for people because they were rated such. And so we did some user testing to try to figure out what the pain points were there. So this is our old quick start page. We ran Indepth user testing. I'm going to scroll through it. Video, I don't know if people want videos in the docs. Okay, you can do this, you can do that other thing. So we're like 4 things you do in this quick start, and with a batch of prerequisites at the end. This is 6 different pages. You might be getting why this isn't working for people. But our user research gave us a lot of actionable steps to make this content better that required that we just rip it up and do it over, like just completely from scratch. So it's not a good candidate for A/B testing. So we picked one of our quick starts in one of our supported language that gets a lot of traffic, and we gave it our new ideal treatment, where we wrote it from scratch to be more concise, to have up-to-date code samples, to have a distinct set of steps, to actually be quick. And we published it. So in the beginning of January, before we did this revision, this particular quick start in Python had an average user rating of 3.67 stars. Not our ideal. We published this new revision of a quick start mid-month and saw this number start to rise. We're watching that aggregated rating over time. And the page now has an average rating of 4.75 stars out of 5. So like, thank you. No, but like the point is that it was only through doing that user research and buckling down and just doing the thing that we were able to make this number move. Had this not moved, we'd be back to the drawing board. We have to go back to the research to figure out what developers really need. But with this data in hand, we were able to dedicate time and resources to rewriting more of our quick starts for more of our developers and more of our languages. Now, additionally, we saw all of our Google Analytics numbers go the right way too. So we were focused on this developer reported rating, but signups went up a crazy amount, bounce rate went down, sessions went up. So this worked on a business level too, which I'll get back to that in a moment. There's still a lot of work to be done on the Twilio docs, some of which we're actively working on right now, some of which we're still trying to figure out what the right thing to do is. And we're still watching those comments come in on Slack every day, analyzing our quality rating metric on a regular basis. There are a few key lessons we learned and relearned through this whole process the last year that now serve to guide a lot of the decisions we make as we iterate on improving our documentation. So one is something we've believed for a long time, and the past years really only emphasized its importance, but accurate code samples are the most important docs feature we can provide developers, full stop. And this might seem like a no-brainer to some of you, but it's requiring us to find creative solutions because with an insane number of sample codes on our docs, we have this problem of maintenance, and we have to figure out how we can keep up with the steady flow of new features and new products on the docs and come up with some creative ways to keep things up to date. Lesson 2, we learned that our classification doesn't matter quite as much as we thought, because developers are primarily task-oriented. So yes, people with different learning styles and at different parts of their journeys will want API reference or they'll want a tutorial. But people coming to our docs don't come in saying, I want a tutorial about something, Twilio. They have a very specific task they need to get done. And they definitely don't care if we call it a tutorial or a guide or a recipe. So ultimately, we need to remember that developers are trying to accomplish something specific. They're trying to build something new or debug something that's already up and running. And lesson 3, we need to build our docs for information foraging, providing clear signposts to help developers find what they need. Developers primarily use Google to find relevant docs. We saw that, we've read that in the academic literature. And this is sometimes called information foraging, where devs are scanning a ton of content really quickly to determine what the right pace, or the right piece of content is for their needs. So historically, we've done things like focus on search engine optimization to make sure people find the right page in our docs, and haven't really worried about it beyond that. But we consistently saw developers feeling lost once they got to the docs. Maybe they landed on a page that wasn't the best page for their needs, or they read it and they're like, okay, what else can I do? Where can I go? They're kind of left in a void. So we learned that we need to build our docs for this foraging. Developers will probably always start with Google, but they need to know that the forest they've landed in has all the resources they need to succeed. We need to help them with that foraging. And lesson 4, my personal favorite, focus on what's best for your developers, and the rest will follow. It's really easy to feel like you have to build your docs to increase signups and upgrades and get spend up, especially if you live in the marketing realm at your company. And this is where that quick start story means a lot to me, because while that did increase our registrations, it did things that make the business happy, we weren't actively focusing on that number. We were watching our North Star of developer-rated quality. And so we know we didn't sacrifice the developer experience to get like our business metrics up. And now we know that if we focus on that developer experience, everything else is going to follow it. All the good things are going to happen for us. That's what we'll do to learn how to make things better. So we're talking about empathy, and it's not easy. It's messy. Developing it takes time, and letting go of our own egos. All of the practical lessons I just went through are things we think are universal, but we're talking about our developers at Twilio. You won't know what your developers need the most until you dig in and get to know their frustrations and needs. We have to meet our developers and our users where they are. We have to feel their pain. And we have to then do the necessary work to delight and serve them, even if it means admitting that we were wrong about how we did something. So having mechanisms for user feedback and in-depth user research, a commitment to small changes and measuring them helps us be a clear process rather than this like terrifying dive into the void of how your docs are doing. And it can actually drive you to data-driven discovery with empathy at its core. Because I really believe that that's the only way we'll be able to provide the best developer documentation is by building our empathy for developers. Thank you so much. I'm Kat King. Enjoy the rest of your day.